Yes, I would like to welcome everybody. Thank you for being at this seminar today. This is the SOLAS seminar series. This is seminar number 10, I believe. And the title is Plastic Accumulation at Key Interfaces. And we have two researchers today with us that are going to tell us very interesting things about their research on plastics accumulation. And this is also something that we decided to organize together with my colleague Liselotte and with the SOLAS IPO, because we have an upcoming workshop in Italy, which is sponsored by SOLAS in the next few months. And so you will hear a little bit more about this in a few minutes. And I just leave the floor to Liselotte, who's going to explain something about SOLAS, what SOLAS is, and so on. So thank you again for being here, and yeah, have a great listening to these talks today.
Thank you, Luisa, and hi everybody. Hope I'm sharing the right screen. You should see a presentation. Yeah, okay. So let me just introduce very briefly what is SOLAS, for those of you who don't know what SOLAS is. An international organization working on surface ocean, lower atmosphere studies. SOLAS is sponsored by SCORE, Future Earth, IGAC, and WCRP, as you can see here. And yeah, we have, SOLAS has a core team, so it's working different scientific topics. You can see there's 5 core teams: greenhouse gases and the ocean, interface and fluxes of mass and energy, atmospheric deposition and ocean biogeochemistry, interconnections between aerosols, clouds, and marine ecosystems, and then ocean biogeochemical controls on atmospheric chemistry. And I think today we're mainly looking at maybe atmospheric deposition or biogeochemical controls for the plastics. And then there's some cross-cutting teams, integrated topics, climate intervention and science and society. And this was the science plan of SOLAS up until 2025. And we're working currently on a new science plan that will go up to 2035. Well, you see there's a little bit of shift. There's more, so it's a differently organized science plan, which includes discovery science, solution science, science for solutions, and capacity building. You can see different topics that are integrated in these different topics, but it's not all finalized, so I won't go into much detail for this new science plan, but it's coming up very soon. SOLAS is governed by a scientific steering committee, which counts 16 members from 14 different countries, so it's very international. And we try to have diversity and inclusion, so we try to have people including from all parts of the world, including the Global South. There is an IPO, which you have seen briefly on the Zoom probably. So there's an international project office that is based in the State Key Laboratory of Marine Environmental Science in China. And that is led by Lili and Yan Yang. They are also present here. And then there is an early career scientist committee, which is launched in January 2023. It's a strategic and operational body to coordinate and champion early career scientist activities. And both Luisa and myself were part of this early career scientific committee. And we did quite a few activities. Just to illustrate a few, we had a workshop in 2023 online. Some of us organized a fire science learning across the Earth system, a flare workshop on fire on fire in 2023. Then we also organized side events at the Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona. And we are co-organized the SOLAS Open Science Conference Early Career Science Day, which took place in November last year. And we're currently developing also a mentorship program. So if you're interested to join this committee, there's still some open places. SOLAS also sponsors and endorses projects and time series. You can see an overview here. I don't have time to go into detail, but if you have a project or a time series you think are relevant to SOLAS, you can contact them and they can write you a letter of endorsement or support you. One of the key events of SOLAS is undoubtedly the summer school they organize. This is a picture of the 9th SOLAS summer school that took place in 2003 in Cape Verde. There were 66 young researchers from 25 countries. They were there for 11 days. And the summer school consists in lectures, practicals, different sessions, also poster and oral presentations, and a field trip to the Cape Verde Atmospheric Observatory. And so the SOLAS Summer School is organized every 2 years, so the next one will be in 2025. And the other highlight of SOLAS is the Open Science Conference that was organized also every 2 years. And it was organized last year in November 2024 in Goa in India. There were approximately 250 participants from 25 countries. There was also an early career science scientific day. And there were quite a few side events. So this was like something I wanted to highlight. So this is every 2 years. And then upcoming events for SOLAS or where SOLAS is involved are listed here. So the next one will be at EGU, where there is a SOLAS sponsored session on air-sea chemical fluxes, impacts on biogeochemistry and climate. There is a SOLAS session at the Baku 2025 conference, which is on biogeochemical interactions across the atmosphere ice-ocean interface. There is a guest joint workshop on research priorities for improving global flux estimates of atmospheric deposition to the ocean, which will take place in April in Greece. And then there is our workshop that we organize with Luisa and part of a few other people. That is called Spots for Surface Plastic Remote Sensing. This is a Future Earth ESA sponsored workshop that will take place from 28 to 30 this year in Italy, and the registrations are open now. And then there is also the 10th SOLAS Summer School that is coming up in 2026, so that's another year. We'll be in Brazil next time. And if you want to stay in touch for all these events and more to come, please join the mailing list or follow us on Twitter or on Blue Sky. And you can scan the QR codes here if you want to join us. And all the contact details are on the bottom. So I'd just like to thank you for this, and then I'll leave the word to Luisa, who will introduce, say a little bit more about the workshop plan.
Thank you, Liselotte. So yes, as Liselotte introduced already, we take the opportunity of this webinar to discuss about plastic on key interfaces and talk just a few minutes about this workshop that we are organized, and the registration is now open. So it's a workshop essentially funded by Future Earth and European Space Agency joint program, and sponsored by SOLAS. So we have the support of SOLAS for this workshop, and it will be in Italy. This is the website of the workshop. And can you go to the next slide, please, Liselotte? Just, yeah, so the main topic is to welcome researchers and experts across various communities to understand what do we need in terms of knowledge gaps in plastic pollution monitoring, that, for example, remote sensing and space-based applications could help filling in. And so we really welcome a different variety of people to discuss together and understand what are our needs, what would we like, for example, a new sensors to be developed, so that could help us monitoring, tracking plastics from the rivers to the sea, so that it could allow an early intervention while on land, or also to monitor how it is moving on the ocean surface, which is something that Stefano, Dr. Stefano Aliani is going to discuss in a few minutes. I will put the, okay, so the Jan has already put the website of the workshop in the chat. So that's all about the workshop, and I just would like to introduce now our first speaker. And so who is Dr. Stefano Aliani. He is Science Director at the Institute of Marine Science of the National Research Council in Italy, and he works on physical oceanography and ecology, focusing on marine hydrodynamic distribution and their climate and ecological implications. Stefano has been working on the distribution and dispersal of marine debris since the 1990s, so he's a real expert on marine debris, and is member of many international working groups, and he's the Italian representative of SCORE and chair of the SCORE Working Group 153 on the floating litter and its oceanic transport analysis and modeling. He's one of the International Science Council expert of the Working Group of Marine Plastic Pollution for the Global Plastic Treaty. So, Stefano, the floor is yours. Please share your screen, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, SOLAS, and you all for inviting me to give this talk. I'm very happy to present this story about the roles of physical forcings on the distribution of plastics. It's just an approach to the problem, and there are many approaches. And I just introduce you a few words about if it goes down, what's wrong with this. Okay, I'm from Italy. You see the arrow where I live. I'm in the northwest of Italy at the National Research Council of Italy and the Institute of Marine Science. Well, let's start directly on the topic. And the basic sentence is, whatever the origin, any floating particles on the sea surface is affected by ocean currents. It's not the only way to move, but whatever surface currents affect particles. So the question is, what floats on the ocean and how do they move on the surface? Well, floating items shaped human history. I cut out from a paper, I don't know which one, the story of October 11, 1492, and floating items shaped the history. You know, Columbus discovered Americas also because he found floating items on the sea surface. They were not plastic, of course, but so floating items has always been on the sea surface. They've always been moving. And these are some examples: wood, pieces of wood, or rocks. This on the left is pumice, volcanic rock that floats. Now, what floats on the ocean are artificial items too, mainly plastic. And if you see the global production of plastic on the left side, you see that there is an increasing trend in plastic production, and the projection are to 1.2 billion tons by 26 if we are in a business as usual scenario. Many items, many different items with different properties float. Just to give you some number to have an idea of the dimension of the problem, about 500 billion bottles are used worldwide in a year. And that means 40 billion plastic bottles per month, 1.3 billion plastic bottles per day, 1 million plastic bottles per minute. So this is the dimension of the problem. If you want to know more about this, copy this link to Reuters website. So we are talking about something that is really massive. We are talking about millions and millions of tons of plastic going into the ocean, and projections are follows the production growth. Just for example, what floats? Macro items means the trash we usually put in the bin. Part of it doesn't go where it should go in the disposal sites or dumps or whatever, and they reach the sea. These are some data from the Mediterranean Sea, and we are in 2015, I guess. 62 million microplastic items were expected to float over the Mediterranean Sea, Western Mediterranean Sea. 70% of it is plastics. Plastic, once in the ocean, let's suppose that it's lined like a plastic bag, is interacted with waves and became embrittled if the extension of the items due to waves, for instance, exceed the textile strength. So big items became small items. This is, just to give you an example, in air, the extensibility of polypropylene is quite different from what happens on the sea. So after that, plastic macro stuff, the numbers we have seen so far became smaller items. And if we skim the ocean with a net like this, something plankton scientists are very familiar with, what we see is stuff like that. We have these tiny, small pieces of plastics on the mesh, and then on the microscope you skim, and that is microplastics. That's what microparticles, and again, macroplastics. This is the size classes of plastic particles. They are they reflect the traditional dimension of plankton, but there is a lot of scientific discussion about these size classes so far. So the question now is that we want to address here is how do they move on the surface? There are many processes potentially involved in the transport, and we cannot address all of them. In the simplest case, massive dumping in a location generate a local high density of trash. That's obvious. I sent something in the water and that became a local trash. But oceanographic processes transport these items from these original sources. And there are many processes involved. This is the stomal diagram showing a time scale and a spatial scale of oceanographic processes, and all of them affect plastic transport. We will address some of them. Let's start from the very small part, diffusion advection problem. If we drop something in a beaker or whatever, we have, and that item dissolves in the water or the liquid, at the end we have a distribution of the original item we sent it. Just like this, you throw it, at the end on the right you see a homogeneous distribution. That's obvious, it's something we all know. So if the source is a single spot, as we did in our Baker experiments, the dispersion will be high concentration gradients close to the source. After sometimes, if diffusion change doesn't change, the distribution is expected to be distributed, resulting in a distribution like this, in a Gaussian distribution. These curves are dispersal kernels, and they are probability density function of number of items versus distance. So you have the cloud, as in the Baker, and that moves, and that moves, and the concentration decreases with distance. That's a very obvious and basic knowledge about diffusion. In the real world, this curves doesn't exist. So what we have is that sooner or later our distribution hit a wall, and at that time the dilution stops, and we have a local accumulation. What is a wall? That's the question. There are many potential walls. Sorry, I don't know how to go to next. Yes. One of the possible walls are fronts. The interfaces between two different water masses creates a barrier, just like a wall, and that's one of the places where we may have accumulation. Or also eddies and circulation, when currents flow in different directions, create a frontal system, and we have accumulation. A very simple experience you all have is if you look at the train railroads, and plastic and items accumulates between the two rails because of the opposite direction of the airflow. That happens in the ocean as well. And of course, items moves along these interfaces over incredibly long distance. If we can show you an example. What you see on the right is Harley Davidson, for those familiar with motorbikes. That motorbikes was found on a beach in North America, and it has a Japanese plate. That the motorbike was on somehow floating on the surface, probably trapped in something I don't know, and crossed the Pacific and reached the Atlantic from the Asia to America, and I think it's the only motorbike who crossed the Pacific in my knowledge. That motorbike is in Milwaukee Harley Davidson Museum, and that means that currents are the highways of the ocean to transport. Many processes create these highways. If you look at this paper, you have a summary, a review of this, and I will talk about some of these processes in this speech we have now, and they are at different spaces in different places at different scales. Let's start from large-scale ocean processes. Ekman transport creates regions of surface convergence and divergence. And areas of convergence are found in subtropical gyres, which are basin-scale current systems forced by wind stress and coastal boundaries. Surface divergence, on the other hand, is found in the subpolar gyres. So this means that we have a convergent area, and this is the Pacific, where the currents circulate over large distance, and inside of this gyre, there is accumulation. These are, if you compare the data, in situ data of plastic accumulation, you see on the plots, in the plots on the right, what happens inside of the gyre, and outside of the gyre, you see an increased abundance of plastic concentration within the gyre, this large-scale gyre. This is what is called the ocean garbage patch. Every ocean has its own garbage patch. On the left, you see a microplastic mass distribution through ocean models, and you see that every ocean has its own garbage patch. So we have 5 garbage patches. These large-scale processes the gyres are not stationary in space and not static in time. They are gyres and accumulation zones change shape and move with time. Despite the persistent common misconception of a garbage patch as a giant floating island of trash, concentrations are lower than in the Med, for instance. The floating island of trash does not exist. It's a journalist way to present things, and it's no floating island on the Pacific or in the oceans. Mesoscale processes. Mesoscales are slowly rotating vortices, size of hundreds of meters. They also form fronts and filaments between them by straining of the surface waters. These fronts became unstable and form submesoscale eddies, which are smaller and faster. You see an image of mesoscale open ocean processes. Eddies exist in 2 types, mesoscale eddies: cyclonic, counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern, for which the radial component of surface flows is mostly outward, and anticyclonic, the radial component is inward. And an anticyclonic eddy has more time debris in the core than the cyclonic one, although submesoscale eddies are more effective in accumulating debris. So in mesoscale, we have this pattern. The westward drift of this long lead structure results in transport over thousands of kilometers. Even if the process is relatively small, the movement of these mesoscale gyres can be very, very long. So very large distance can be covered. Some mesoscale, we are talking about processes on the scales of few tens of kilometers. You see some information about how floating particles are affected by some mesoscale process in the finding of Dazzaro. And here, plot some accumulate at density front and in cyclonic vortices, the opposite of the anticyclonic mesoscale eddies. So we have different patterns of accumulation where we are talking about according to the size of the eddy, which is very interesting for accumulation pattern and transport. The mechanism, the physical reasons that causes this accumulation is quite complicated and related to stretching of the vortex of submesoscale vortices. Oceanographic processes of scale of few tens of kilometers are submesoscale processes. Although we can see them from high-resolution satellite images, you see one example in the figures here, these submesoscale processes are typically not resolved in high-resolution models, or at least not easily resolved in high-resolution models. So we have to use remote sensing to address the movement of these structures. Another important physical process affecting transport is Stokes drift. Stokes drift means that particles floating on the surface of a wave experience a drift velocity in the direction of the wave, and it's known as Stokes drift, as you see in the figure. Surface gravity waves in the open ocean are mostly generated by winds, and for this reason, it's often assumed that transport carried by waves can be parameterized in model as a fraction of the wind speed in the same direction of the wind. However, and these are the new findings, are working with Stokes drift in models, waves are slower to build and are more persistent than winds. And once they have evolved into swell waves, they travel very long distance with low dissipation. So the use of Stokes drift in ocean modeling to understand plastic transport, it's a challenge, and it's very, very open to discussion. For instance, in the Indian Ocean, Stokes drift brings particles out of the Indian Ocean and causes drifting particles to cross circumpolar winds and currents and reach Antarctic. In this paper, published in 2018, an ocean model, the transport model, did not include Stokes drift in the first run and couldn't explain why kelp was found into Antarctic area south of the polar front. If Stokes drift, when Stokes drift was included in the model, the distribution perfectly fit the distribution of kelp. There is no analog for plastic so far in this area, but very likely macroplastic behaves like kelp in the Southern Ocean. Even if at global scale, Stokes drift does not contribute to large-scale accumulation of microplastic or macroplastic in the tropic areas where the large-scale processes take place and are more important. It's able to transport plastic across the polar front in the south, especially in the Southern Ocean, because of the storm-generated waves that are very large and very common. However, whether floating plastics are actually transported with the velocity of the surrounding Lagrangian flow, whether, I mean, plastic moves as expected by Lagrangian modeling and theory, or whether particles' shape, density, and size affect the property of transporter are open questions. So we don't know yet exactly plastic particles behave in the real transport flow. These are open questions, and I leave it open for discussion or for people who want to think about some ideas. Internal waves and internal tides are quite common in the world's ocean, and when a tide change and the wave propagates onto the shelf and shoreward and create a train of internal waves. And this train of internal waves generates surface currents that has been highlighted by the paper of Shank. This is an image of some of these internal waves around the promontory. I don't know where is it, the place. And you have a series of slicks or lines that's sometimes called windrows, propagating in the direction of the internal waves. This is what Shank said in his paper, and it creates the scenario we have seen before. We have a rough and smooth area that alternate one after the other, and this creates a surface dishomogeneity, and plastic accumulates there. This again are remote sensing of the evidence of internal waves in the Mediterranean Sea between Sicily and Calabria in the Messina Strait. On the right, we have ADCP profile of these processes. Plastic accumulates there. That's an idea. This is what happens to biology. We have an accumulation, a high increase of biodiversity in this internal waves alternation of accumulation and dilution areas, and they are biological hotspots. There are models who suggest that there is accumulation areas for plastic as well, but there is no debris in situ ground truth yet. Transport due to wind, plastic, and especially the micro stuff, is transported directly by wind. Windage is the combination of the drag and the form drag results from the friction of the surface of the object exposed to the wind. Form drag arises because the wind pressure on the part of the object above the sea surface. This is the scenario. If the item is under the water, it's low windage, the transport is low. If the item is a great part of the item is out of the water, the windage is high. When we want to model and describe the real world transport of plastic items, windage is a relevant variable. We change according to the properties of the particles that we want to model. Line-wall circulation is it's a special kind of process that takes place on the sea surface when the wind creates pair of counter-rotating vortices aligned horizontally with the wind. And it's interaction between the wind-induced shear flow and the wind-induced Stokes drift. This is how windrows in the ocean look like. It's a series of parallel surface lines, also known as sea slick lines and streaks. It's a pattern similar to what we have seen for internal waves, but the distance between the lines is different. This is again an example of Langmuir circulation, and has been discovered by Langmuir in the Sargasso Sea by Langmuir. This is how they look like in coastal areas, but they are also in the open ocean. This is the shape of a Langmuir cell, where we have two counter-rotating vertical or 3D flow. with accumulation in the center and divergence between two lines. So we have convergence, divergence, convergence, and divergence, and so on. The red spot in this are plastic items that are that accumulate on the areas and are more scant in the divergence areas. We have some data, or in situ data, on plastic in Langmuir cells, but it's open to new science. In coastal zone, the transport is more complicated because many processes are not linear and are different from what happens in the open ocean. Mainly, the transport is influenced by wind, waves, tides, and water depth. So the transport in the swash zone depends on the buoyancy of the items and this asymmetry of this flow in the swash zone. And in general, floating particle items that are seawards of the shoreline, but within a distance of approximately half of the length of the beach, probably will beach again. So they will remain in the beach area for a long time, where they change shape, where abraded, brittle, and change their physical properties. And especially close to the beach, most of the transport is due to diffusive motion because the mean flow is low. And this is a paper from Nichols 2008, graphs from Nichols 2012, and shows how fast the current speed decrease when you go close to the beach. So what is released on the beach has a great chance to remain there for a long time. I go to conclusion. Many processes affect plastic transport at the ocean surface. And today, now, we just got a bite of some of them, just a very fast idea of what was them. We have gap in knowledge on how these processes can be quantified, how they exactly work. And I present here as an inspiration for future research on the topic to anybody who wants to develop this idea. And most of the literature on marine plastic debris is less than a decade old. And even if the number of papers increased dramatically in the recent year, there is a lot of knowledge in other fields and communities that has been working on the field on their fields for longer time that can provide important information to plastic pollution. For instance, I just listed oil, sediments, ice, and plankton scientists. Conclude final, most of the discussion we had so far assumed a steady, non-changing ocean circulation, which is a hypothesis, but could not be true in a climate change scenario, where the role and the relevance of some processes may change in the future. Final sentence is plastic litter is an atrocity and the testament of our throwaway society, and it's something that we should address for people living now and for future generation. I'm done for my presentation, and if you have questions.
Thank you, Stefano. Very interesting presentations. Please feel free to ask questions. We have time for them, and then we will go on to the next speaker. Don't be shy.
Well, if nobody says anything, I wanted to add a concept that came to my mind when SOLAS has been presented a few minutes before. You were talking about atmospheric deposition. And atmospheric deposition is super relevant for plastic pollution too. For instance, the presence of plastic microfibers in Antarctic waters are not explained by ocean models, by the process we've seen so far. So it's very likely that the source is atmospheric deposition. So that's also another idea for new knowledge gaps that has to be filled.
If nobody has a question, I would like to ask one if I'm allowed. You mentioned with the windage that there would be different windage for different forms of particles. Is there anything known about transport of particles at the surface according to their different shapes or densities or things like this? Do you know anything about this?
Yes and no. I mean, there are some papers that have been published on idealized shapes. For instance, trunks or spheres or theoretical items, and to see how they interact with the water. When you go into the real items where the shape is not predictable, if you want, a plastic sheet or I don't know, a plastic bottle, there are no quantitative information, just general assumption and no quantitative explanation on the transport of, for instance, of a plastic bottle, if it's full of water or not. Whether the windage, there is no data in my knowledge about the transport speed on the sea surface, for instance, of empty plastic bottles or a half full plastic bottle. No data. And also on the aerosol, on the role of sea aerosol in transporting microplastic and fibers, that could also be relevant because the transport distance of aerosol is order of magnitude faster and longer than any ocean current.
Let's see that Peter Liz has a question. So.
Okay, can you hear me now? Good. Well, just want to agree what Stefano said about atmospheric transport. Anyone who was at the SOLAS science conference in Goa would have heard my talk on that issue, and also recently in China at the ISMAR meeting, but also to mention bubble bursting of the sea surface as a means of transporting stuff from the sea surface on the surface of bubbles, and that being brought into the atmosphere and then obviously part of the atmospheric circulation. Some of it redeposits on the ocean close by, but some of the smaller stuff gets transported considerable distances. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may say, absolutely agree. I think this part has not been addressed so far. I wouldn't say enough. Even in the simplest scenario, experimental scenario like sampling the ice spray on a beach, that is quite easy, looking for microplastic or fibers. I don't know of any information about that. And if you go into the Southern Ocean and you include Stokes drift into the transport, and you see that the waves, breaking waves, your Southern Ocean waves breaks usually, and they can pass the polar front, and we didn't put foam in the model. That could also mean that the distance covered by surface items in a foamy breaking wave scenario with strong winds could be hundreds of magnitudes more efficient for transport than any ocean transport.
Don't seem to be any other questions at the moment. Maybe people will have more questions at the end of the second talk, so maybe we can move on. And if you think of something, don't hesitate to put it in the chat or raise your hand at the end of the second question.
Okay, so thank you, Stefano, for this inspiring talk. And I would like now to introduce Dr. Gilberto Binda for the next speaker. So Dr. Binda is a researcher at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. in Oslo, in Norway, and a lecturer at the University of Insubria in Como, Italy. He has experience in environmental chemistry and the biogeochemical partitioning of major nutrients and trace elements. He applied cross-disciplinary expertise to emerging fields in environmental science with a recent interest in plastic pollution research. So welcome, Gilberto, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for SOLAS for inviting me for this talk and this opportunity. Today, I would like to talk to you about some indirect effect of plastic pollution in aquatic ecosystem. Hope you can hear me and see the screen, by the way. And in this talk, with actually a pretty long title, I figured it out later, but I will drive you to that. I will show you some recent findings and potential future directions in trying to understand how plastic can indirectly affect natural ecosystem functioning. And how can it happen? Through accumulating in key ecosystem boundaries, which are, for example, the water-air interface and the sediment-water interface. So, before digging into the actual science related to that, I just want to give you a bit of what will be going on in the next 20-ish minutes of the talk through this outline. I will start with a very quick introduction regarding plastic pollution and the fate of plastic in water bodies. Actually, Dr. Aliani already did a great job in defining a couple of defining these processes. And then we will dig in more detail on the potential effects of plastic accumulating here. So the likely alteration of some key ecosystem exchanges. We will work mainly on three main components of ecosystems. So very broadly, nutrients, organism with a main focus on microorganisms especially, and energy exchanges. Then we'll drive you through a showcase of different studies made at different scales, from lab scales to mesocosm at different relevance, to understand these potential alterations and to reconstruct the likelihood and potential effects of these processes. Finally, I will quickly show some key knowledge gaps and a potential way forward to understand especially the relevance of this kind of alterations. So, starting with the global issue of plastic pollution, I won't bother you too much about this already known issue about both by the scientific community as well as by the general population. We have an issue of plastic which is related to an extreme abundant use. You can see some data here in the graph on the right of this slide. We have an increasing trend of plastic with a usually relatively short lifespan regarding the object, but with properties which make this material extremely durable. And this is the key environmental problem which leads to what is called plastic pollution in almost every corner of the globe so far. Won't bother you a lot with that, but the main concept which I want to introduce you here is that even in the most optimistic scenario of reducing or even stopping completely plastic production today, we will still have increasing or at least same environmental concentration of plastic for the next following years. And even if that's not enough problematic, we will have, of course, the so-called aging. So having plastic which becomes more brittle and more likely to fragment, forming the so-called microplastic, these smaller, faster fragments. Of course, this is worrying, and a lot of people are currently doing research on that, understanding how it moves in the environment, but also the effect. So what can happen to the ecosystem with plastic accumulation? There are several effects, some well-studied, still with increasing knowledge, for example, toxicity on different organisms, but still there are some broader and unclear environmental implications to be studied. To understand, of course, the effect, we have to understand where plastic is accumulating. There are, of course, several variables and still different question marks regarding where plastic is likely to accumulate. But we are starting to figuring out some areas in which it's more likely to accumulate, which can be soils, but also water bodies, especially, for example, lakes and ocean, as already highlighted in the previous talk. There are, of course, several processes which can affect plastic distribution, which can be several environmental variables, such as winds, waves, currents, but also some features related to plastic properties, especially density, starting from the main polymer composing plastic, as well as the suite of additive included in the plastic object, the size, and of course the shape of the different fragment of plastic dispersing. However, there are two main groups, I would call, of plastic which can accumulate vertically on the surface, so start floating on the surface of the water bodies, and other plastic which are more likely to sink vertically and possibly accumulate at the shallower part of the sediments. So in these two important interfaces for the ecosystem. And once plastic accumulate there, what can happen? There are several effects that we are expecting and are more or less studied so far. I'll try to use the pointer here. Okay, you should be able to see it. We have, of course, a very worrying and direct effect, which is direct toxicity on different organisms, which has been tested from a various wide range of organisms, starting from microorganisms to vertebrates. But we have several other indirects and more worrying in a way and subtle effects which are likely to happen. Some of which can be impacts, for example, on carbon cycling, or for instance, even to other nutrients. This may be related not just to plastic, which expectedly is made of carbon, so it's likely to impact carbon cycling. Plastic is made by several other elements sometimes, and can have further implications also for other nutrients. And even more worrying from my side, we can have some effect on the properties of the abiotic component of the habitat. So we have this solid, which especially from the toxicological point of view, it's kind of something challenging, because we used to work with the dissolved substances, which can be liquid or gaseous substances, but less likely we used to work with other solid besides some nanoparticles. And then plastic has this peculiar property of being actually a solid and having the physical and chemical properties which are relatively marked from different other kind of solids which are naturally dispersed in waters. This can cause several problems regarding the abiotic component of the habitat. Before digging actually in this other effect, I want to mention this other process, which is related to these peculiar properties of plastic fragments. Plastic, in fact, present generally a good hydrophobicity and other features which are different from other naturally dispersed solid, and makes this new pollutant very likely substrate to be colonized by a specific microbial community, which is an actual ecological succession, starting usually with bacteria and autotroph, and then ending up also with, for example, protozoa attaching to the surface of the fragments. And all of this depends also on the plastic properties, such as polymer compose, shape, size, and so on. However, this community has been observed so far to be marked and different from community forming of natural substrates, as well as the pelagic community, so the microbial community in the water. And this can have further implication for the ecosystem functioning. And here is, in this sketch, a bunch of these likely implications, starting from nutrients on the left, organisms in the middle, and energy here on the right. There are some potential examples of what is likely or less likely to happen once plastic accumulate in these key interfaces, such as water-air and sediment-water interfaces. We can have, for example, some inhibition of gas exchanging due to this actual physical barrier, which is floating plastic. we can have some impact related to the presence of a specific community on the plastic surface, which can in some way, which still we don't really know, interact with the pelagic community or the benthic community once plastics sink. We can also have some other indirect effect on the energy balances, for example, through a proper filter by floating plastic to inhibit light influx, or as well as some effect on heat transfer or bioturbation in the case of sediments. All these things are still more or less studied, and we will see now some different case studies of these three main components and how they are assessed so far. Starting from nutrients, there are quite some research going on, especially considering gas transfer and carbon. Here is an example by Dr. Galgani, actually, in which there was a mesocosm experiment for seawater, in which they added polystyrene plastic in this big tank with seawater, and they observed several effects, all in combination. They observed a physical effect ending in a reduced exchange in CO2 and oxygen. They also observed some changes in the biomass of some microorganisms, for example, cyanobacteria, Synechococcus, and as well observed several effects on the water chemistry as a consequence. So what we can see here is that there are several processes going on usually which finally affect the potential natural exchange of ecosystems. And there are other, of course. Well, another example is the potential release of other chemicals from plastic. In fact, plastic is a complex matrix with several organics and inorganic chemicals added to, let's say, improve some potential properties depending on the plastic object which is made. These chemicals can be toxic sometimes, but can also act, for example, as a different kind of organic matter, which can even foster sometimes higher microbial growth. An example here is this study made in laboratory, where these are the results on the right. And what has been seen is that an incubation of these microbial consortia in water with plastic leachate foster more biomass than actually the organic matter from a lake. That's, of course, worrying, also considering some potential rebound and cascade effect. There are also some research going on regarding potential release of volatile compounds or greenhouse gas emissions. Plastic can as well act as an accumulator of other chemicals, such as metals and some minor nutrients, not just toxic metals. Here, again, the biofilm forming on plastic seems to be a pivotal process, which drives an active accumulation of several cations on the plastic surface. There is actually quite some research so far, especially comparing pristine plastic with plastic collected in the environment, which is very likely to be enriched in several metals and minor nutrients. However, the broader relevance of this process still need to be understood. Moving now to the potential effect on the organism change related to the presence of plastic, I would like to introduce you this kind of conceptual model in which we understand how the biofilm can actually affect potentially the microbial assemblages in natural water. Plastic, which is likely to be from land-based source, even in the oceans, usually can be actively colonized by several microorganisms during its transport. And due to its property, because usually plastic is relatively not much dense, can move across the landscape and be finally accumulated in water bodies, carrying around this microbial community. Then a question which some researcher asked himself is how then this community on the plastic can interact with the natural pelagic community, and which can be the broader implications to that. I was among these researchers asking this kind of questions, and here I report an example of a study we made with some colleagues at NIVA in a more simplified system, so in a lab scale, in which we tried to expose a pelagic community from freshwater to pristine plastic, there was some small polypropylene fragments, and instead the same plastic type, which was instead colonized before by a microbial community. What we observed among some different changes in water chemistry was that the species dominating the pelagic community were not affected by the presence of plastic, but show a decrease in their concentration in water in terms of number of cells, only when exposed to this biofouling plastic. And this probably was due to some competition with this biofilm community, and as well for the detachment of this biofilm community, which start to colonize also the pelagic realm. And this effect, of course, need to be rated regarding the potential environmental relevance. There are also some other side effects which can be related to this colonization of plastic by a specific biofilm, which can be, for example, the accumulation of several pathogens, which was observed in environmental sample, as well as the release of cyanotoxins, which was observed as well in several environmental samples, as the one is highlighted here in this picture. Similarly, other studies highlighted potential accumulation of antibiotic-resistant genes. So we have some potential issues also related to human health from this accumulation of plastic in key water boundaries. Finally, a couple of examples related to some effect of energy exchanges when plastic is accumulating these interfaces. One example, which can be fairly intuitive in a way, is the potential effect on the light influx for the water column. So imagining a layer of plastic, especially if covered by, for example, autotroph, but even some smaller plastic fragments in the top layer of the water column, we can understand that is likely to have an inhibition of the light influx for the wall column in the bottom part of the water column. Therefore, we can expect some implication. However, this was not so abundantly studied so far. There is instead this recent example of a mesocosm studies performed in seawater with this huge plankton net. And when it was observed that the presence of plastic added in this mesocosm showed some reduction of the light irradiance, which was measured at the bottom of this mesocosm. This first process initiated a series of cascade effects, both for the microbial community as well as the potential metabolism of this community. In fact, it was observed a slight shift in the community composition regarding bacteria and phytoplankton, as well as different ammonia concentration, possibly related to a change in metabolism too. And I will finally show this other example related to instead heat transfer, which is even less studied so far. And I saw just this relatively old paper on beach sediment, in which it was observed that the addition of plastic in a laboratory scale is likely, thanks to owing to the physical property of plastic, is likely to inhibit its transfer in sediment, and due to some changes in pore size, also affected water conductivity. While this process is still under investigated, it's extremely important to understand some potential effect related to that, because we have likely implication, for example, for ecosystem productivity, such as for the changes in the development from resting stage of plankton. I will now conclude showing the key knowledge gaps of this different effect we observed. I showed you several case studies with different kind of processes. However, while some of these are pretty worrying, we still have to rate the likelihood and the environmental relevance of these kind of processes. As well, we have to rate these processes with what we should call the direct toxicity effect, so some chemical effect related to plastic itself. To understand this, another knowledge gap would be to understand which is the actual residence time of plastic in these key ecosystem interfaces. So how long plastic can affect these natural processes. So we have some potential way forward to understand then the environmental relevance of these kind of processes. For example, starting to upscaling what we have seen in lab scale and increasing complexity from mesocosm or field studies in order to likely understand better the potential exposure scenario. Finally, we can combine this kind of experiment with improved monitoring programs in order to better understand what can be the plastic fate and the fluxes, of course, so to better understand the residence time. And I have concluded here. I will thank you again for this opportunity, and I will be happy to answer any question which can pop in your mind.
Thank you so much, Gilberto, for this very interesting presentation. If there are any questions, please raise your hands or just write it in the chat. We have a question already in the chat. I don't know who wants to address it. So, is the sea salt present in the sea responsible for any type of formation of microplastic particles?
May I answer?
Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
Flocculation does. I mean, the sea salt only changes the floatability, the possibility of the particles to float, but the difference is really negligible. There is no relevant changes in floatability due to salt. What happens in the ocean, as been said, is the formation of the inclusion of plastic particles in marine snow. That happens.
If I may just add another thing that I recently saw in literature is that salt concentration can affect the so-called aging of plastic, so the changes in the physical chemical properties, but is still be seen just in very simplified laboratory system. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't be sure in telling it's increasing the product, let's say, the fragmentation of plastic so far.
I have a question if there's nobody at the moment who would like to ask something. So for Gilberto, I am more familiar with marine systems, but in freshwater environments, did you observe like plastic or microplastics on the surface, like as we see in the sea surface microlayer, for example, in marine environments, or is there something similar? So we have observed in the past that we have a lot of organic material that may help keeping the plastic right at the surface, somehow just interacting some sort of marine, not really marine snow, but like exopolymers that can be very in very high accumulation at the sea surface, and that could trap somehow some particles. Would that happen similarly in freshwater environments, like in lakes, for example, or?
This may happen, but I would say I am more afraid about sediments in freshwater, both just for a physical reason, with having less salt and having even some less dense polymer more likely to sink. And these kind of processes are also likely to make, like biofouling, for example, are more likely to make plastic prone to the sinking. And instead, I'm more worried about the air-water interface for sea. So these kind of two processes are complementary depending on the water body in case of study, I would say.
Thank you.
I can also, it's just a curiosity question, because you mentioned sediments in freshwater environments. Is there actually a difference between the plastics they find in the sediments, incorporated in the sediments, and the ones you know are present in the water in general? Is there like a filtering out effect, or not really?
Well, it is mainly dependent on the kind of environment. I would say in the lentic system, so mainly in lakes, we have similar composition, but usually a slightly higher composition in some polymer, for example, PET or PS, which are usually denser. This kind of effect is not so visible instead in lotic systems such as rivers, because sometimes even changes in flow can cause this so-called flush out of the sediments, and then the kind of composition in terms of polymeric composition is similar. But what is been observed so far is that generally speaking, we have higher concentration trapping sediment in fresh water in comparison to what is found in the water column.
And the part of the microplastics that don't go to the sediment, in the lake system, for instance, do we know, is that the part that gets eaten or back emitted to the atmosphere, or is there no?
I don't think there is such, let's say, categorization of the kind of source. Still, hard to tell, I would say.
Okay, so there's no closure there either.
Yeah.
Because I thought that's like a nice closed system. Maybe that's a good start.
It may be the simpler, but still, there's still quite a lot of variance, which is also due, of course, to the measurement, because we have still problem in harmonization, so it gets things harder, of course.
I have a question, another question. Sorry. As we have seen from Stefano's presentation, so we can look at windrows and floating matter and other kind of proxies to kind of have an idea of where the litter is in the ocean. And what about the river system? So is there a proxy that you would recommend, or you would need, or you say, okay, let's develop a sensor that is able to track this particular, like a tracer, to understand litter transport in a river system, so that we would be able to block it right at the beginning before it ends up in the ocean? So I don't know, like in the sea, it could be floating matter or other materials in the rivers. I don't know. And how would you address that? So what would you need? Or
Not an easy question, I would say, but regardless, what has been found so far was a good correlation between, in general, total suspended solids and litter and even microplastic generally. But of course, total suspended solid, especially in these freshwater bodies, is more related to inorganic material, which of course is generally denser and slightly different, has a slightly different hydrodynamic behavior from plastic, especially the macro one. Maybe the micro is slightly similar. And so I would say this can be the only proxy that come up in my mind, even it's not the perfect one so far.
thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience, or?
It's very shy today.
Yeah.
Hello, how are you? I'm Ninoshka, and I would like to ask you if you know, because you talked that some organisms colonize the litter. So do you know how much time they need to colonize this litter? I mean, I think that there is going to be a difference if it's in marine ecosystems or in fresh water, and if you know this difference between each other. Thank you.
Yes. So what has been studied so far, highlighted, because usually is focused on prokaryotes, sometimes on eukaryotes as well. But if we're thinking about prokaryotes, it's a matter usually of hours, even both in freshwater and in seawater as well. They'll be talking about, it's a very dynamic process, of course. So there are some few colonizers starting in a litter in a matter of hours or days. But then this community is changing a lot over time, and usually a mature community reach the kind of, let's say, I wouldn't say a climax because it's not so stable, but what has been observed, at least with the microorganism, is to having a relatively stabilizing condition around in the order of weeks or a couple of months. These are usually the longest experiment made so far. And however, when thinking about environmental sample, more complex systems start to build up. So we have even crustaceans sometimes attached or other arthropods, for example, but this of course takes longer.
Thank you.
No worries.
I don't know if somebody also has questions about SOLAS or the upcoming workshop that will be held in Siena in Italy. Just feel free to ask.
And if you think of something after the seminar, you can always contact us by, I think people should have our emails.
Yeah,
So
also if the speakers would like to have their email, maybe they were in the presentations, or like put your email in the chat in case some people have questions that can be addressed later on if they think about something very interesting. And thank you. Yeah, no, I'm just going to add so our emails should be on SOLAS website and on the seminar page. And for anything else, you can just contact us or SOLAS IPO. So, well, then I would say that we can finish here. I know that in some time zones it's already pretty late, especially for our SOLAS IPO. So thank you, everybody, for attending today. Thank you to our speakers, Stefano and Gilberto. And yes, we hope to see you at the next SOLAS seminar. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank